So, hello everyone. Here we are with yet another, month of our free webinar, and we have our special guest. After a long wait, we have Dr. Paul Epstein. Um, he has over 50 years of experience as a Montessori educator, administrator, teacher trainer, and speaker. And Paul has profoundly influenced the world of education, inspiring countless parents, educators, and schools globally. He's the author of several remarkable books that continue to guide Montessori education, like An Observer's Notebook, A Handbook of Montessori Philosophy, and The Montessori Way. His unique approach, that is rooted in children's first thinking, has redefined how we nurture and support early childhood education. And I'm really honored to have him here with us today to share his invaluable insights. And I really thank you from my heart to all my live audiences to be patient and waiting for us to, join with Paul. So let's dive into this enriching session with Paul, and we'll explore the critical period of infancy and its profound impact on child's development. So, Paul, let's begin with you, sharing your experience as a Montessorian for over 50 years. How did you become involved and what sparked you to become a Montessori educator?
Well, again, everyone, my profound apologies for the delay, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be with everybody. I'm grateful for all of that. If each of you stays active and busy with something for 50 or more years, you'll have white hair just like I have. I can promise that to everybody. I was very lucky to find Montessori as a university student. I was in my second year in the US as a student taking classes in early childhood education and had an opportunity to do some assignments in a school called Montessori. And I had never heard about Montessori. I wasn't sure I could say the word correctly when I first began. And the children in that class, in that school, made such an impression. Here I am many years later.
That's very inspiring. And you became an author as well. So the books that you have written, who are your target, readers, and why did you decide to write these books towards Montessori principles alone? I mean, how heavily influenced, this Montessori principle that, inspired you to write these books?
Well, there's really two groups of books. One group is written for parents, but also for Montessori educators, and that's the Montessori Way. I co-authored that book, and it's actually coming out in just a little while, a new edition, very updated. The first edition came out maybe 20 or more years ago, and the new edition is soon, I think within a month or two, coming out. Very updated, and that still is written for parents, for people just beginning their journey in Montessori education. And the book ranges from the little bit of history of Montessori education to from infants, toddlers, through Montessori adults, people who are becoming or have become certified Montessori teachers. The other books that I have written have been written for Montessori educators. The Observer's Notebook, really, I've tried in that book to really provide a lot of technique and skills for classroom teachers, because the Montessori method is observation. It's just that Dr. Montessori didn't actually write very much about how to observe. She wrote a lot about why we should observe. She wrote a little bit about what to observe and almost nothing about how to observe. So I thought perhaps there's a void, a missing piece, and try to fill that missing piece. And so that's the book that Montessori the book, An Observer's Notebook.
Hmm. Actually, it's very important. And what you mentioned about she talking about how to observe, but not how to observe is something that we have to explore. So we are talking about the infancy, the most critical period we talk about, right? Um, First of all, let's understand that uh, the research suggests that this is the crucial period when the brain develops around 80 to 85%, right? Um, what do you have to say about it? And as you said, observation is a key, instrument in this. So how can you explain this critical period and how do we observe and support these children in this age group, 0 to 3?
Yeah, you're quoting correctly the incredibly impressive amount of brain development that occurs in such a relatively small amount of time. And that incredible amount of brain development suggests to me that we have to rethink our role with infants. They're very small. they're they fool us. They trick us into believing they're kind of helpless. And it turns out they're very good at tricking and fooling us. They kind of have a little racket going. It's a good deal. I get all these adults in the world to smile at me, and I get them to hold me and pick me up, and they're very proficient and excellent at crying and making loud noises. And we adults drop everything and come running. And of course, if that's not an amazing racket they have going, they have this incredible thing called being cute, right? And they're just right from the moment of birth. I'm a parent of two grown children, and now I have four grandchildren. And so, all of us parents from that instant of birth, we all do the same thing. We quickly count the fingers and the toes, right? They're so cute. They're so little. Of course, I'm being silly, but not really being silly. The power of this newborn, and then as they age, is this incredible power of love that just takes command of each of us adults. So they're quite, quite amazing. In the absence of language like you and I are using now, we have to observe. And we have to observe carefully the many ways of communication and expression of these newborns, 1 years old, 2, 3, and so on. They are communicating all the time. And it's just a language we're not terribly familiar with because we used to speak it when we were babies. We've forgotten how to speak that language. And as we observe and commit ourselves to understanding the message of each behavior, what is the intention of each message? What is the need that they're expressing? And sometimes the need is not, I need a food, or I need a water, or I need a milk. It's also, I need to understand you, or I need you to understand that I do understand you. And I'm trying to tell you something that will really help you, even though I'm just a couple of hours old. And so I'm going in circles with how enamored and how in awe I continue to be with this incredible, incredible gifted being, even though they fool us in thinking they're helpless, and they're really not.
Yeah, I completely agree with this, and I can totally resonate because recently I had this baby in our family, and I think he's 2 months old now. The baby now is awake during the daytime, and every time the baby starts crying, the family thinks it's time to feed because the baby is hungry,
Yep.
and this is why the baby is crying. Even though I'm constantly telling them it's not what the baby needs all the time, they do not have so much space in their tummy that they all the time need food to, stay happy and, smiling and cool, calm. It's that they want that human interaction as well. Now, being a family, it's difficult for family members to explain this. It's easier for other people who are really invested in understanding and learning, you can explain, but with your own family sometimes it becomes challenging, right? Having said this, I see that this constant mindset of most families where the child is awake and the child is crying means immediately you have to either formula feed them or breastfeed them, but that's it, and then pat them and put them to bed. Now, as you rightly mentioned, that observation is the key to understand that this baby not really wants food, or is not just crying because they are uncomfortable, but probably they want to know you, right? So how do we, as an observer, not just parent but also as an observer, how do we understand that this child is hungry at this time and this child needs that human interaction or human to human touch or bonding? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, but it's also a fantastic understanding that a cry, a crying is not a crying. And I'm forgetting the person who presented this. It's somewhere, I think in YouTube, someone has done an analysis and has identified the meaning of 5 different types of crying sounds. Uh, I apologize, I'm forgetting all of the types, but it is as you've suggested. One cry means, "Hey, I'm hungry." Another cry means, "I'm lonely." Another cry means, "Just hold me. I really would like some comfort now." And to be able to distinguish as an observer the different types of crying sounds allows us to communicate in this crying language. Now, wonderful to me is that if we get it wrong, the child is only too happy to continue to cry. Till, what's wrong with you? You have a big head, you're a big person, you have a college degree. Why can't you understand me? And they'll persist until we finally connect correctly with their intended communication. So I think if we can change our thinking, and that's the hard part. The baby's fine. The infants are really tremendously fine. It's us who has to rewire ourselves once we begin to consider that one of the purposes of one of the baby and infant's purpose is to become independent. Then that changes our orientation to almost everything that's going on. And this is easy to say and so difficult to live. It's easy to say the more independent a child becomes, the more intelligence they will develop. See, those words are easy. The more independent a child becomes, the more intelligence they will develop. To live that statement is really tough because we were not lived this way. We were not raised this way. We were not educated this way. We have muscle memory, deep engrams, total neurological network wiring in our heads that are the result of become independent. Then you start to observe yourself. So observation turns out to be a relationship, not just with the child, but it's also a relationship with yourself.
Wow, this is so profound. And Yeah, so rightly said that, the more the child becomes independent, it develops the intelligence as well. Um, so we are talking about an independent child, and we also know about absorbent mind at this age, as well as the sensitive periods, right? So how are these, theories we can work upon to support these children become independent individuals from this very young age?
Yeah. So now I'm going to beg forgiveness from everybody, because what if the idea of Montessori, absorbent mind, and the idea of sensitive period isn't standing up very well to current research? And I don't want to say, well, Maria Montessori, thank you so much. But since 1952, your year of passing, there have been several interesting discoveries that give us a moments of pause. So let me get more specific. So she has this delightful metaphor of the absorbent mind, and she writes that it's as if the child is absorbing everything, and in the process of absorbing is constructing a container. And she writes that impressions for an adult get put into this already made container. So you retain your ethnicity, your heritage, your culture that you have constructed when you're an adult. And new things just get put in there, but you're not making the container anymore. And what the absorbent mind is doing is building both the container and what's going to be contained. So it's a lovely image. I was just like, it's just a great image, right? And it sounds so incredibly, phenomenally fantastic. And that we need to admire, appreciate, as did Dr. Montessori, with awe, this absorbing. In fact, she goes a bit further to suggest that absorbent mind is the mind of love, because it absorbs without discrimination. It absorbs without bias. It absorbs without criticism. And this is at a level of spirituality that's just remarkable. And this would be a level of spirituality in the historical, most spiritual figures in all of human history, in every part of history, culture, and so forth. This is love with pure acceptance. All right, that's the absorbent mind. But research more recently now, these days, actually is asking some questions that are disturbing this image. And I have a reason for I'm not trying to poke at Dr. Montessori, but I'm going somewhere, if you could bear with me. And that is, turns out babies before birth voice preference. And the funny thing about preference is preference both invites and inhibits accepting. Funny thing. So it turns out that this infant is not exactly purely accepting, absorbing. It's already rejecting. It's already indicating preference, which limits this image of absorbing, accepting in this pure, beautiful, descriptive way of Dr. Montessori. And what do we do with that? One of the things we do with that is we recognize that the biology of human life determines when a development will take place. And Dr. Montessori understood that. The unconscious absorbent mind was birthed to around 3. the conscious absorbent mind, 3 to maybe age 6. So there's this idea of there's a progression, developmental sequence. But it turns out that the DNA, or when something should happen, is always limited or constrained or altered or adjusted by the culture. So Dr. Montessori is happy with that. If a child is born in India and the language there is a particular language, the child will absorb that language. And modern research says, absolutely, but with constraint. So, for example, until about the age of 9 or 10 months, a baby should be able to hear all human language sound, and then starts having a preference for native language sounds as young as about 10 months, and can no longer hear certain sounds of certain languages, which means it will not be able to make the mouth-tongue muscle combinations to produce the sounds it can no longer hear. So we're really not absorbing everything. We're instead taking in preferences that are both genetically and culturally constrained, determined. What about the sensitive periods? Same thing. Same thing. The brain will connect certain neurons at certain ages. And if you miss that certain time of connecting, it's more difficult to do it later. And that's the meaning of sensitive period. But is there a sensitive period for music? Is there a sensitive period for what was one of her other ones? Spatial relationships. Some authors call that a sensitive period. Maybe not. Maybe not in exactly the way she said it. So instead, modern research says the first part of the brains that get connected will be visual, hearing, and language. Then, almost immediately, movement. Well, that sounds very Montessorian, right? Sensitive period for movement, sensitive period for language. Okay, that sounds nice. It sounds like it's fitting Dr. Montessori. It's just that it's not as tidy as she would have us believe. It's more messy. And the child is more of a participant in the developmental process than this unconscious absorbent mind that she had in her poetic way of writing would have us believe. Okay, I've gone on way too long. Am I making any sense?
It's actually interesting. And yeah, I mean, we can. So that was Dr. Montessori 100 years ago, experiencing what she observed, and that's what she wrote. But researchers keep evolving. So definitely, whatever you are saying must have sense, and this is why it has come. And we can see that as well. In my personal experience as well, I have seen that my nephew, or even my daughter, when she was young, and now it makes so much sense that when she was born, for some reason, even though her dad was not around, he would come during my prenatal time. My husband was traveling, so she would hardly have a lot of conversations in the womb itself, and it was pretty much reflected when she came into our lives, because she definitely had a preference. And I remember for 2 to 3 years she was quite hesitant and very reluctant, bonding with him as much. And it took some time because she developed that relationship on trust, and not really just because he was present around her, right? So
Right.
yeah, now I can make that connection. And I'm sure different people will have different experiences. The other thing that you spoke about, the visual, the auditory, language, and then movement, right? So yes, the auditory and visual comes first, and then language sometimes comes late, maybe after 2 years, or sometimes comes early. For my daughter, it started by the time she was 11 months old, but for my nephew, it was only when he turned 2. So I
But
can see that,
excuse me for interrupting. That doesn't mean that his language came late.
yeah,
That doesn't mean that. It does mean his development had a different path compared to your daughter.
Yes, yes,
And that's the challenge of, that is the biggest Montessori challenge, for us to take these developmental milestones and say, okay, maybe, but
yeah,
maybe not.
yeah.
Maybe, but maybe not. In other words,
I
what does that mean?
remember the panic around the language delay, where they started seeking the help of a speech therapist. And as you said, the development is different. It's not that he cannot speak or there was a challenge, but it's just that he decided he's going to explore the environment through movement than start beginning to talk, right? So
Yeah.
it's definitely there in Montessori, but yes, the change and the evolution of the research is definitely also adding up to whatever she has, basically corroborating her observations so far. So it's beautiful. Now yeah, coming to this language development and movement development, as you said, sometimes it's or most of the time it is different for different children. um, how do we communicate as an educator? I'm talking about as an educator, how do we communicate with parents as to it's okay, it's normal, and we will let you know when your child needs help? Because this is one of the major challenges in a toddler's community the educators suffer or face.
Yeah, yeah. Um, One of the last things you just said is, we will let you know when your child needs help. I take a different, I have a little bit of a different orientation. And that is, I'd like to say to parents, just trust yourself. If you think, feel, have the thought, the worry, the concern, trust yourself. Find out. Find out if you get some expert saying you have nothing to worry about, and you just feel that's just not, there's something going on here, then keep exploring, keep finding out. Find the next person, the next person, the next. Always just trust yourself as a parent. And if it turned out, after you've talked to two, three, five, whatever number of people, you finally start to think, okay, all right, I'm going to relax, I'm going to calm down, then fine. But if you still find yourself anxious, and so let me get real specific. I have two grown children, but one of them, when real young, should have been crawling, and the crawling wasn't happening. So at that time, I wasn't as um, as a much younger person, and my experience and understanding of child development was not as what I have today. And we went first to the pediatrician, who said, no, no, don't worry. But we kept pursuing, kept pursuing. But finally, this child of mine never did crawl, just got up and started walking. And then we still talked to other experts who began to say, don't worry, don't, because everything we had been told, everything we had been taught, every piece of wisdom at that time was, there's going to be problems if your child doesn't crawl. Turns out this child never had any problems, got involved during the primary school years with quite rigorous sports activities, and developed incredible musical coordination skills, and turned out crawling had no problem. But we didn't know that. We couldn't. So my message again is, trust yourself. And if you finally start to hear from enough people, you start to think, well, maybe I'll rethink it. Okay. But if you're not ready to rethink it, that's okay.
That's yeah, yeah, that's a very good perspective. And yeah, yeah, I think it works better for parents who are really observant about small details of their child's development. So it makes a lot of difference in their life as well as the child's life as well. So uh, we are talking about these infants, and I remember one of your presentations on the absorbent mind, where you were talking about the firing and the neural development. Would you like to, touch upon that and explain our audiences as to how these firing happens and how is it developing in building that, intelligence in the child as well?
Certain, a number of studies that Harvard University professors have published talk about the brain development at certain times of a newborn's life. And the wiring of the brain, so the child is born with now estimated 86 billion brain cells. But at birth, at a speed, and I honestly don't know how they came up with this number, 1 million brain cell connections per second. I can't imagine this. That's a second. That's a second. Okay. So, all right. And the first brain cells that begin connecting actually before birth are the cells that are involved with vision and with hearing. And that peaks in the first few months of life. So researchers are calling it a sensitive period, meaning this period of very short few months, the child is addressing connecting with the environment visually, with hearing, not understanding the spoken language, but sound. And that sound is making those brain cell connections. Well, what if it turns out a child is born unable to hear, a child is born unable to see? The brain continues to make brain cell connections, but more cells will connect if the child's unable to see with the hearing network, and vice versa. More visual cells will connect if the child's unable to hear. So the brain has a genetic plan of when things are supposed to happen. How those cells connect is the environment and the culture. So the environment, if the environment is visually poor, not stimulating, fewer brain cells that should connect for the vision part of the brain will not connect. Or if the environment is auditorily poor, fewer brain cells for hearing will connect. So the environment also has to be right. The baby arrives ready to go. I'm here, and I can't wait for you guys to figure this out. I only get to do this once. And if you haven't figured it out, then I won't develop my potential the way I'm meant to, the way I'm supposed to develop. So now comes a particular burden on all of us adults to get that environment right. And the analogy the professors at Harvard use is really a simple one, but to me, a powerful one. If the foundation isn't strong, the rest of the building is going to continue to build. But with a weak foundation, the rest of the building will always have issues, will always have challenges. So can the child's brain develop neurologically for vision and for hearing at a later age? It does, but most of the foundational work has come and gone. And now we've got a weak foundation, and we carry that forward through the rest of our life.
So, what kind of environment would you suggest for these children in this age group, which will help their, senses develop better or to the full maximum potential?
It's an environment where the child has access. Now, access is a fun idea because access, you are limited as a newborn. You're not going to be able to stand up and walk and get something. So your access as a newborn is those periods of time when you're awake and you have visual access. You I know some people suggest the newborn, the visual access should be limited, black and white, geometric shapes. Um, Personally, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that that idea really holds up with current research. I'm not so sure that that the notion is if a child's staring at it, then they must be absorbing, taking in that which they're staring at. But the real thing to do is to watch babies and children who are just a couple of months old get bored really quick. And how do we know? They look away. It's part of the, I mean, they're designed to communicate with it. They look away. There's nothing going on here that's interesting. And if we watch a newborn and a 1 month old, 2 months old, 3 month old staring at these simple geometric images, they're not bored. Very good. But that doesn't mean that color images shouldn't be shown. The real task is to observe. What is the child staring at? Because when a child who's not mobile is staring, that's their access. Now, later, when they start to sit up, when they start the whole progression of physical development, and they start to have more access, they are telling us that they're still absorbing, taking in the environment more and more and more. So we observe constantly, what is the child? Now we add a word, interest. Access and interest go together.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is about a newborn or a child who's, maybe 3, 4 months old. How about a child who's in a toddler's community or is a toddler at home? We know that these children are too young and still exploring and still developing their, movement and mastering their skills. So they need a lot of collaboration, right? So, and collaboration is again a very tricky thing because you don't know how much to collaborate and when to step back, right? So, how do we support these children or how do we collaborate with these children, these young children, so that it is not too much, but at the same time enough for them to try more?
I think they tell us. I think they just tell us. If the collaboration is too much, they get uncomfortable and they message or voice discomfort in a variety of ways. It can be a facial expression. It can be a facial expression plus a noise. Sometimes the tongue comes out. Sometimes they just look away. Sometimes they do that thing where they just lose body control, they fall over kind of a thing. If it's, and the opposite's also true. If it's not enough stimulation, they tell us that too.
Yeah, you are right. Because many a times, especially while eating as parents, we have this, mindset that the child did not eat enough. And that is where we are, beginning to shove off the food into the child's mouth. And the child is clearly, moving the spoon away, throwing it away, or, just spitting out. Yet we are, putting the food in and making the child believe that they don't know about their body.
There's
And
a funny thing in, as far as I know, in all of recorded human history, there's never ever been a child who refused to eat when they're hungry.
yeah, that is true. Yes, that's very true. But I still see that, the discomfort in mothers or parents, and especially in a culture where we live in a joint family and everybody is just, judging the mother or the family because the child looks lean. So the immediate assumption is the child is not fed properly and this is why they are lean. So how do we, ensure in a family where it's difficult to communicate with others as well that the child is well fed.
You know, I think one of Dr. Montessori's amazing insights is the power of a child's love to bring adults together, to work and cooperate together, especially when the adults can't stand each other. So that's a beginning, but it does take conversation. It does take conversation between the adults, especially when the adults are different generations,
Yes.
to be able to say, let's see if we can have a conversation about agreement. Can we make an agreement about the following?
Yeah. So basically you are saying coming to a common consensus by having a family meeting where we are, discussing over a situation
Yeah.
and coming to the same point, same page. Is that correct?
Yes, and I will warn everybody, this is very difficult for grandparents. I didn't know this. I didn't know this until I became a grandparent. It is very difficult for us grandparents. You see, we know we made all the mistakes and we never should have made with our children. With the grandchildren, all we have to do is love them. And that's so easy because we're not responsible. So this is real. These agreements are very difficult for grandparents. We can nod our head and say, sure, I agree. The parent goes away. We spoil the grandchild and then give them back. Honestly, I you can hope your parents, the child's grandparents, will go along. Good luck. It's really, just wait. One day you will be a grandparent. It's biologically so difficult.
Yeah. I think we have to understand their perspective as well, and then, you know, figure out a way that works for both the child and the grandparents. So yeah, I understand that. So coming to these children who are below 0 to 3, between 0 to 3 age group, and children who are 3 to 6. Now, generally in a toddler's environment, we have seen, and we usually say that when the child is interested in helping the younger ones, the new ones who have come in the environment in a toddler's community, and they are collaborating more to support them, that is a sign to know that the child is ready to transition to a casa, a children's house. So what is that shift in this child that we can see that change, and is it really very different for to see the characteristic of a child below 3 and a child who's 3 and above?
First, I have to apologize again. I'm looking at my time,
Yeah,
and I wish the computer had cooperated, but I'm going to have to, after this response, say a farewell.
sure. Yeah.
Um, for me, the transition to Casa involves a couple of things. One is exactly what you said. Exactly. Second, the child has to be ready to be in a room that could have twice as many children as the toddler environment. And in that new room are going to be children twice as big. So you're going from oldest to youngest, and you have to be ready for that. Third, in an IC environment, you can use material at a shelf or at a table or on the floor. You have a choice. You cannot use material at the shelf. Now you have to be past that defiance of my way or no way that often accompanies a 2-year-old. Similarly, you have to be able in Casa to wait for a lesson, wait for a presentation. In IC, anything on the shelf is public domain. You can use it whenever, however you want. But in Casa, not only do you have to wait for a lesson, that material may not be ready. You may not be old enough. And that's a one-person material. So you also have to wait your turn. So there's a whole new universe of limits that come with particular expectations that we have to really assess this transitioning child. Are they ready for those new kinds of limits? And if the child is in the toddler environment, content, focusing, concentrating, starting to assist other children, often that indicates they're ready for all of these new demands that are about to arrive in their lap.
Okay. So yeah, that makes sense. And thank you for your time. And yeah, I just wish we had more time to discuss more
I
about.
apologize again
Yeah,
so profusely, and perhaps if you'd give me a second chance, we could schedule in the future.
sure, definitely. I'm sure our audiences will be very much interested to learn more from you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll try to reschedule another session with Paul again.
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
and you have
Farewell.
a good weekend, all of you. And thanks, Paul. Stay healthy.
Thank
And
you so
yeah,
much,
thank you.
Paul. Thank you, Madhuri. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye bye.